This is the Making Waves Mindset Show with your hosts, Richard Biase
and Dave Moskowitz. Learn from our journey as we share the ups and downs
of being your own boss.
Well, welcome everyone to the Making Waves Mindset Show.
Welcome.
If it's your first time tuning in, thank you. This is where we come together and join our Making Waves Mindset community to help push you out of the 9-to-5 or maybe inspire you into becoming an entrepreneur. It's a great place where we combine business, health, wealth, mindset, and the journeys of life that come with this.
If this is your first time tuning in, thank you very much for finding us. Hopefully you found us on one of our popular platforms and or our YouTube and Rumble channels. If you have, click that button on the bottom, subscribe, follow us on social media, follow us on your favorite podcast streaming site. And if you're enjoying the episodes, please share. This is where we get out to speak to other people and get some good ideas and good guests coming on. And we have the ability to affect change in people's lives and affect change in our own lives. So follow our journey along. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If you're not enjoying it and you don't enjoy the episode, like I always say, share it anyways. Send it to someone who might. I'm sure there's some people in your lives who might enjoy listening to some stories and listening to some advice. And so today we are welcoming Chris Shebib. Shebib,
yeah.
See, I did it. I even asked before, and I did it.
Yeah.
It's okay. Chris has been somebody in my network of space, and through friends, we've kind of gotten to know each other the past year and a bit. And I know from our conversations, you have like an incredible journey. Like we were hearing things about, a relocation to the US and back. And it's like, we got to dive more into this because for Dave and I, you share that mental grit, that mental determination that we look for in people who want to leave and to do their own thing. And we're happy you can join us. So, Chris, without further ado, take it away. Let us know who you are and your journey, your story. And that's what really resonates with a lot of our listeners and followers.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, guys, for having me on. Happy to be here and happy to share insofar as it could help or inspire, or even happy to do it. So looking forward to this. I have like you said, kind of a unique path, right? I've had 3 careers so far: carpenter, contractor for a number of years, then went into technology for a number of years, and now real estate full time. And so that, just diving into the entrepreneurial bug, that was something very early for me. So even in high school years, to my own detriment in a way, I was working in contracting, was picking up those skills reasonably quickly, and was able to provide value as a result. And so was making, from a disposable income standpoint, I was making good money, which was very distracting for a high school student. And by the end of those years, I was ready to start my own business, which I did. So I started my own contracting business in residential first, and then moving into some commercial work after that. But that was, that entrepreneurial bug was started real early. That ability to, essentially, to me, I describe the bug. One, obviously, we do it for financial freedom, and we do it for our own ability to kind of control our environment. These are all motivating factors, but there's another one there, which is the idea of expending more effort for more results. And that is a very interesting kind of, for me at least, a very interesting foundational item to examine while we do different things in our lives and how that variable changes from thing to thing, right? So that was the hook for me is, I was making good money per hour. I could control my environment. I could make a difference. I could provide value, which is what gets me up in the morning. But I could provide more or expend more effort and get more money as a result. So this is obviously, as we evolve, we want to move away from that. But early on, that's a very addictive kind of variable to be engaged in. If I work harder, I'll end up making much more money. And that was a real hook early on for me.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, Chris. You talk about adding value, and I know those entrepreneurs that kind of struggle with trying to get started. It's like, what problem are you going to solve for people? Where are you going to add that value? And Shaq has always been very famous for saying it wasn't until he changed that mindset to how can I solve people's problems by adding value, that's when his businesses became very successful. So I acknowledge you mentioning that right off the bat. You noticed that immediately.
Yeah, and for me, guys like Shaq and those kind of huge characters in entrepreneurial life and in the world, big influences. And for me, it was my uncle actually said to me really early on, kind of planted the seed of, we've all heard of this Venn diagram, things that you like, things that add value, things that you could charge money for. Yeah. And the overlap in between those three things is where we can start to find recipes for success. And in not so many words, he planted that seed in my head in my teen years, right? Which is, it's never about what you did yesterday. Wherever you are, whether you're in your own business working for clients or you're working for somebody else, think about the value you can be providing tomorrow. And that was one of the, again, for some reason, at that time in my life and in his life, when he said that to me, it kind of landed and that seed planted pretty firmly. And that's how that got to be there from such an early age. And I worked for other people for many years, and I worked for myself for a bunch. And regardless, that stays there, right? You have to be thinking about how, and like they say, right, the tougher the problem you solve, the more money you can make by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yeah.
So Chris, as you transition from that contracting space, what were the feelings and emotions like at that moment? Fear has been something the past week. I put something on my social media where people are not wanting to take action because they're doing something that's uncharted. They're doing something that's new to them. And here you are quickly recognizing that I got something here I can do. I'm helping people. What were those feelings and emotions like? And that might resonate with someone looking to go, hey, I can do this. Chris is talking about something that's aligning with me right now. And this is how I can accomplish that fear.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I think you're touching on a couple of things, very interesting topics, right? How do we, in an environment that's changing like this one, and it's changing in many ways, right? Not just in one or two, but in many. Yeah. How do we keep moving, and how do we kind of, it's this balance, right? So many things are paradoxical. It's this balance of paying attention to those things that are going on, not being blind to them, but also not being paralyzed or crippled by them. And so we kind of, it's a 70-30 split. Everybody has to make their own ratio decision around those things, but how do we stay attuned to them while keep moving? And I guess, I mean, insofar as it might translate for somebody else, for me, I grew up in an era and in a time where change was constant. In my own personal life and in development. And I think that translated. So, what was it like moving from contracting into technology? Yeah. People kind of take note of that each time I mention it because it looks like such a 180-degree switch. And it was in many regards. I was terrified in a few aspects. But the switch really came from an appetite for change that allowed that switch to happen. But also, there was probably two other drivers in there. One is probably fueled from a good place, which is I had the ability to go and do more. A fundamental desire and belief surrounding that idea, right? And so for me, I was, 6 years into contracting. I had my own business. I'd done most things a few times. And so, and as I was looking at it, there were some harder times in contracting during those years. Okay. As I was coming out of high school, as I formed my own business, there were some harder times. And so one of the big drivers for change for me was, I don't want to start having a family and kids with an income that is this susceptible to drying up. Of course. so that was a big one. But there's another underlying thing for me that translated through my life, which was, if it didn't scare the shit out of me, I was starting to become bored. And so, yeah, and that didn't kind of crystallize, that self-awareness didn't crystallize for a bunch of years. But it was a pervasive underlying trend for me through many changes. And that came as a gift and a curse, right? Like the gift is I tackled a lot of learning curves and now have the benefit of having a bunch of experience. No, arrogance meant in that, but it's a unique path that now helps me a ton in the real estate that I do. So that's really, really good. The downside is it can create some unrest and some stress while you go through it.
Right.
Of course.
And like so many of these things, I think all of that is good so far as you're aware of it and you use it as a tool and it's not running you, right? So in the years that I was less aware of that, I think that was probably, 50-50. Was this working for me or against me? Once I crystallized, then it's like, okay, now I understand one of those fundamental things that's driving me. And now I can use it more as a conscious tool that works for me more of the time, right?
I think what's interesting there is you're one of the very few, so rare, that you want to live that life outside of the comfort zone. Yeah. And that's the common theme we find on the show with other guests, is like the comfort zones where they're happy. And you're like, no, I've never wanted to be in the comfort zone. I want to live in the fear that's going to scare the bejesus out of me, to challenge my knowledge, to challenge my work ethic, to challenge success. So that's something I kind of, even myself, like, Dave and I have talked about our previous lives and our previous line of work. At some point that comfort level just gets boring and you're like, what am I going to do? So you make the leap into fear, you do something different, and then you're like, okay, this is scary. What do I do next? Right. And you just have to punch through it and do something. That's part of our motto, making waves, dreaming bigger and taking action. You just have to do something. And I thought it was so interesting you said that.
Yeah.
Like, you want to live in the fear.
Also, the fact that you've now changed the career to something else, so you can, it's a real life career changes in terms of your skills. These are fantastic skills to have. You've transitioned from being able to, make a house to now sell a house and do all the paperwork in between.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those are great skills to transition from.
Yeah, and it's funny, when I moved from contracting into technology, one, I didn't expect any crossover really, other than like pure foundational entrepreneurial stuff.
Business stuff,
yeah. But the overlap is undeniable, having made that transition. So software architecture, building buildings, building software, the parallels are, they're one-to-one. One is the reason why those dots are often not connected is because one is pure abstract and the other one is pure, literally brick and mortar, right? So it's, but having made that transition, it's undeniable. It's a one-to-one correlation, which was fascinating after having made the move.
So the contracting stuff you were doing here in Canada, and then you decided to take the Silicon Valley route. Where did you end up with that?
In the technology avenue?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was an interesting path as well. So I spent 15, 17 years in technology, 5 in Silicon Valley, and then the rest here in Ontario.
Wow.
Yeah. So I started writing software, did a year of consulting at a university here, moved to Silicon Valley, worked for a startup. So I was, I think, employee number 9 for a startup there.
Wow.
So this
Imagine
was,
if you were 007. Number 7.
Yeah, exactly, right. That
we had somebody a few episodes before you who was 007. It's the same kind of situation. A startup company was 007.
They were employee 7.
Oh, if only. That would have been amazing. Yeah. So, and this was a real interesting time. So it was August of 2000. And so the tech bubble burst in the spring of 2000. So moving to Silicon Valley then, the tech bubble had burst, but it wasn't pervasive yet. So it was kind of unfolding when we got there.
It was the Y2K stuff, right?
Yeah, just after that. That's right. another kind of crazy, the sky's falling, nothing happened, right?
Right.
Not even a thing.
Computers are going to blow up.
Terminator.
Terminator.
Lights are going to stop. Yeah.
AI is going to take over.
Yeah, exactly. Right. All in one evening. So I mean, moved down there. The move down there was kind of super interesting. So we went down on a TN visa.
Right.
The TN visa, you can't get pre-approved for that. You have to show up at the border. So we literally sold everything. Yeah. Sold everything, showed up at the border, had a job offer. So it was still crazy enough at the time that, we were here, we put our resumes up for jobs in Silicon Valley, and we were just swarmed with opportunity because there were still people, while the bubble had burst in the spring, it was still kind of craziness there, but settling.
Okay.
And so, we show up at the border and they tell us that it's all good, but you need letterhead on this job offer or we don't think it's real. So we stayed the night at the border and we're like, letterhead, like
what's a letterhead?
Not, because there's no vetting in letterhead. We can all make up letterhead. So
that's right.
It was really bizarre, but it's almost like a flexing of the muscle a little bit. Kept us at the border for the night. The next day we crossed and did the 8-day drive to California, having never been there.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was, employee number 9, started writing software, did that for a number of years, started managing the team, moved back here, started managing larger teams and outsourcing engagements in about 6 different countries. And then for me, and it's still the same way today, where I really enjoy business and technology at that time is insofar as technology could solve business problems and business strategy, right? So I eventually moved to the business side, running product management and doing market analysis and financial modeling and market research and governing where those products went as opposed to building them. So that in itself was a real interesting path with tons of what I consider to be really high paid training.
That's interesting. So at some point now, I feel like you have that entrepreneurial bug that's coming back into you. Like you want to move on. Where does that hit? Was it the leave from California or shortly after coming back to Canada?
Yeah, it had always been there, but you're right. As a secondary, not a primary during those years of, especially during technology. I was, messing around with different things while I was working for somebody else. I bought domains, built out some sites. I did a bunch of that stuff. But also doing real estate investing since 92, alongside contracting, alongside technology, but as a secondary for a lot of years. But then, the catalyst for change after many years in technology, there were a few things, but one of them was I was starting to run different divisions. So I ran 4 different divisions, ops, IT, custom solutions, and product were the 4 that I was overseeing. And the ops oversight was one that we had a big technology outage at the company that I was working at. I had just inherited that division, like 15 days under my belt, and those systems melted down. That had been built up for 10 years. And it was easily one of the most challenging things I've ever been through. But and it wasn't the challenge that was the catalyst for change so much as my job was at risk. Having not created that environment, I was now accountable for it and could very easily have lost my job as a result of the money that was lost from those systems melting down.
I was thinking about that.
And that, wherever control and accountability are misaligned, that's where it creates a challenge for me. I don't mind the accountability. In fact, I embrace it as long as I've got the control that goes along with it. And that was just such a poignant reminder that yes, you're accountable, and no, you don't have control over this environment. And that was like, okay, no, I'm now going to switch the primary and secondary. The primary was working for someone else. Now I'm going to switch that again because I'm not okay leaving things in this state, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the most case, I would say, when you work for large organizations or larger organizations, and you are not a worker bee. When you climb the chain and you climb that ladder, you become more accountable, less control.
Yeah.
And that's just that. I think it's hand in hand with these large corporations. The compensation's there, but they hold you to that compensation. So I think that's for me. It was definitely something that I struggled with throughout my corporate career, was that you impart the responsibility on me, but yet you don't give me the decision-making ability.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah, you might have several tiers of decision-making above you.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things where I, we're well aligned, right? In that feeling of, geez, I've got the accountability, but not necessarily the control. How you fix that exactly, I don't know. Because I had a fair amount of respect for those above me and the accountability that they held.
Right.
And so they needed to be involved in those decisions. But in the end, it was a model that just didn't merge well with my needs. And so away we go, right?
Yeah. I don't know how you ever fix that, because I think it's such a model that's been established through corporations for so long that you would almost need to blow up every single large corporation out there and start over again. And basically demolish the high exec pays and spread it out between all the employees and make everyone worker bees and don't have any high executives anymore.
Yeah. And it's so true. Like, that's not an easy riddle to solve. But the other kind of realization or crystallization for me was as I moved up the chain and had more oversight, while there was a question on this in my earlier years, that question was soon answered as I moved up the ranks, and that everybody lives on a spreadsheet in those environments, right? And that spreadsheet gets reviewed, and when cuts come, the higher that number is beside your name, the more risk you're under, and so it's almost like a Russian roulette game in a way, right?
Yeah. I was having this exact conversation with a family member of mine, and they were suggesting that another family member of mine should try to move up in the organization. So I said, moving up in an organization is good. It's good for yourself. It's good for it's learning. It's good for your responsibility, but it's also precarious because as you get higher into a private organization, even a government organization, you are now costing that organization a lot of money.
Yeah, and closer to the chopping block.
You are being compensated for the decisions that you're making. As soon as you make a wrong decision, or as soon as the outcome of the decision that you make goes wrong, you're closer to that door.
Yeah, that's it. And so, you kind of, looking at that, it's like, okay, this is everything comes with pros and cons. Is that cost benefit still working for you, or do you need to start planning? And right back to kind of the origin of this particular thread, it was, okay, I've had a lot of really high paid training. I've loved the super sharp people that I work with. I love technology, but the overall cost benefit, not so happy with. And that's where I started to look at the third career. Hey, I think I'm going to form a corp. And these flips that I've been doing, I'm going to, look at those as more structured, more from a pure business standpoint. Started to get more on a background activity of real estate investing that I've been doing for years, just with the knowledge that I was lucky enough to acquire. Then I started to say, okay, let's put some real business fundamentals around this, and let's look at now forming a business. And so I was doing that during the tail end of the corporate years as well.
Very good.
Yeah, getting ready.
Yeah.
So Chris, what I enjoy about your journey here, and something that we always try to share to our listeners and followers, and by no means, Dave and I, we're not the perceived experts. The purpose of our show is to show people, like, look, this is the up and downhill battles of actually leaving the 9 to 5 and making our way into this, your own boss world. Is that you still had other revenue streams, so to speak, or you were actively diversifying other things behind the scenes, not just solely relying on one channel. And I think what we run into today is most people just, I got to work the 9 to 5. There's maybe a pension at the end, and everything's going to be hunky dory and smiles and rainbows, right? But you still decided, I want to keep my feet wet in a few different areas, which kind of let the bug going. So how was the mindset at this point where now you want to go, okay, I want to move on. I want to try something different. Share with us kind of the resiliency, share with us that mental grit and determination to have that transition back into, I want to form the corp and I want to take charge of my business now.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of stemming from those drivers that we just talked about, right? So, and this is a really interesting thing for me as I watch, study myself, but also study the people around me. Is, you know, what fuels a person, what's driving you? And there's kind of, for me, there's two macro buckets that you can look at. There's fear and there's like pure passion. If you could, you know, imperfectly articulated, I would say, you know, you're falling into one of those two camps in some ratio, right? Mm-hmm. So there was probably those two things at play in terms of my, you know, the foundational drivers for me as I prepared and built, you know, formed the corp and started to think about making that third transition and move into the third career. And the fear comes from, hey, this happened and I might just be fired for it, even though that wouldn't make sense. That might just be what happens. Mm-hmm. The realization of the spreadsheet that we talked about, those are the fear types of drivers. But there was also, you know, that same entrepreneurial bug from that I kind of embraced during high school years was still there, still being fostered in the background through those various activities, and that was the second, I would say, probably positive fuel source, if you want to call it that, that led to forming those corps, and as you said, having diversifying. Which is an interesting topic all on its own. Is, you know, do you diversify, and if so, how much? Because we all know getting spread thin, you know, doesn't work either.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So those two fuel sources, I think, were really, you know, roughly a 50-50 mix for me of passion and fear. The resiliency and the grit. Those are fascinating topics. I lots to be said there. I'm not, it's not, you know, the tumblers aren't dropping for me right now in terms of how resiliency and grit landed in that transition. You know, outside of the idea that, you know, again,
it was like a natural fit for you basically then. So you just kind of, there wasn't the need to rely on that because, and sorry to jump in, I find even for me in this journey, it's those moments that you feel the uncomfortable that you have to go, or you feel comfortable, you have to go into that fear category. You know, oh, this is something new I have to do. This has never done it. There's that part of you that doesn't want to do it. And you're like, you need to do it. You have to do it. You haven't done it. So get into that space. But you just had those natural inklings going through that process of back into being your boss at that point.
Yeah. And for sure. And that resiliency and grit, like, I think comes from early years too. Right, like just you know, a kind of something that's kind of built into you through some of those early years. Certainly, I felt some of that during those times as well.
What were kind of your supports during that time? Did you have a mentor? Did you have somebody who was coaching you? Was it family? Was it how did you make that transition? Yeah, I did do some coaching while moving into investing full time. For sure, still do a bunch of coaching. Big believer in. Insofar as I think it's an accelerant, right? And this is one of those things for me. If we're doing it right, I think we're going to want coaches our whole life. You know, growth doesn't stop at retirement or whatever age. Like if we're doing it right, it's till your last breath kind of thing. And so I really am a big believer in coaching for two reasons. One is show me the recipe. Right. You know, we've all got a bunch of experience, but if you can show me the recipe for this specific thing I'm trying to do, then that's worth paying for to accelerate things. Right. And the second one is show me my blind spots, right? Like if you can show me a blind spot, man, how much is that worth? Like that's years of searching and journaling and self-introspection
And if somebody can point that out to you in a constructive way or otherwise even, that's amazing. So coaching for sure.
Right.
Now it's the industry, the real estate investing industry is built out far more than it was, especially during the early years, but even during the transition to full time for me. So the coaching was there, but it's the infrastructure and the support is far better today, which is amazing. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. I think the power of technology also helps with that. No longer is it just the meetup room at a hotel somewhere. It's the fact that you can connect with people across Canada and the world who share those same views and are showing you what works in various, investment niches in the real estate space too, which is something that, my wife and I, Stephanie and I, have already taken notice of. So that's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
Well, there's a really interesting thing too. I found that, there's these concepts, right, that people far smarter than I kind of put out there, that, we're driven by, what pain is greater, the pain of staying where you are or the pain of dealing with the fear of moving somewhere else.
So true.
And there was these inflection points for me, where it was like a natural turning point. What had worked well to get me to this stage no longer works for me today, and now I'm going to need to make a change to get to the next plateau, whatever that looks like, right? So there was one for me in moving from contracting, going back to school, which terrified me, into technology. There's another one in California. While I was working for startups, there was some pretty crazy stuff happening. As we mentioned, the bubble bursting, a lot of tumultuous corporate activity happening. M&As, restructures, new CEOs, it was constant. And so that was, there was a real transitional time for me there. And those times I think are fantastic for a person, right? Like when you get to the point where that, hey, whatever has got me here has been great, with all appreciation and gratitude that got me here, but it's starting to crumble. And if I'm going to get to this next place, I'm going to have to rethink some stuff or learn some new things or both.
Right.
Those moments, I think are fantastic and ultimately what we live for, right? Like this is where real transition and growth happens.
Yeah. It's a very valid point to highlight that. I think we forget to let those natural moments of our life, we're always trying to push ahead. Like we always want to get, what's next year going to be, instead of kind of living in the moment now, not to sound cliche, but finding those natural pivotal moments when, there was an inflection point here and an inflection point there. And that's what led me on this path to where I am today, and it's very crucial. It's something that, Stephanie and I are dealing with right now as we're looking at additional opportunities and we're doing so many different things. It's like, but we've never done it before. Is this the moment right now? Should we be paying attention, take a pause? Is everything lining up? And when those things are questionable, we look back and go, everything's happening for a reason. These are the inflection points for our journey.
Yeah, that's it. Right. And so, you kind of, there's this other concept that I as I was managing people, I would often talk to them about this and remind myself of it as frequently as possible as well. And it's like this concept of altitude, right? What altitude are you thinking and moving from? And so we all need to be at ground zero at times, right? We all need to, get things done, move through our day and kind of navigate that way. But if we spend too much time there, man, that just turns into a grind, right? Like it's just one damn thing after another. That's what that turns into.
Yeah.
And so where one of these characteristics of successful people that as I study the people around me, is their ability to transition up and down, to go up to 60,000 feet and see out 5 miles, and to be able to get big picture perspective and make strategic decisions from that place, but then drop down, the next minute and get a bunch of stuff done. And the easier a person could transition up and down through that altitude continuum, the more successful they seem to be, and certainly the happier they seem to be while they did it. So that was one of those things that kind of landed for me, and like I said, something that I continually remind myself of is be good at transitioning up and down, because getting stuck in one place or the other isn't where you need to be. You need to be able to do the entire continuum.
Yeah, it's that whole idea of the big picture, right? Looking at the whole big picture. And I think that term, the altitude thing, I've been using that for a long time, but not in those exact words. I've been always saying, got to look at things from like 30,000 feet in the air. You got to look at the big picture. You got to look at everything overview and then narrow it down after and see what it's like after. But yeah, definitely true to words. That's really nice to hear.
Yeah, I know.
What are some of the cautionary tales you can say that you've developed over the years through transitioning from, because you really went from, even though it was in your high school days, you really went from your entrepreneurial world, then you chose the 9 to 5, and then now you're back into the entrepreneur. Looking back at those transitions, what were some of the cautionary things that you can now look back and say, okay, this is how I can, if you were mentoring somebody else, what you would say?
Yeah. Well, geez. I mean, I think
it's a tough question.
Well, geez. I mean,
we asked the tough ones here.
And we might need to book a whole other episode for this one because there's a lot to be to be contemplated there.
Sure.
But I mean, I would say the one I touched on earlier, maybe. And so let me kind of genericize so that it might be more applicable to more situations. I would say the decoupling that society tries to champion between business and personal, I would say, that's fine. We all try to show up at work and be as professional as we can, but there is no decoupling the two. In the end, we are one in our personal and our business, and so that's a cautionary tale insofar as that strong characteristic or underlying driver that I mentioned earlier of, if it wasn't scaring the crap out of me, then I was bored. I would caution people to examine what is the fuel source that's driving you. Is it fear or is it passion? And for me, that was probably a survival fear-based framework, right? If it's not scaring me, then I'm bored, and so now I need to go scare myself again. It produced lots of good results, but while I wasn't conscious of it, be careful, right? It is I don't think it was, but it could have been the fuel that switched me from contracting to technology. And if that's the case, well, that's maybe that works out, maybe it doesn't. But what we definitely don't want to do is be unconscious while we do things, lack the self-awareness that helps us understand why we're doing what we're doing, and as a result zigzag back and forth. Right? There's lots and lots of that out there of people kind of overcorrecting and swerving left and swerving right, and we've all seen that. It's kind of like a cartoon drawing of somebody digging for gold, and they're a foot away in 20 different holes, right? And the one guy digs one hole and finds it.
It's so true what you're saying, because a lot of people will transition within a corporation to various roles to satisfy that need for excitement or change, when really you should be asking yourself, why do you want to switch to those roles? What's the purpose behind it? What are you trying to accomplish? Where are you trying to go? And look inner self first before you start transitioning. It's very important.
Exactly. And like you said earlier, right? And when you think about promotions, well, promotions can be very good, but why, be careful what you build, be careful what you wish for. And is that really a win for you? Yes, it's more responsibility, and that could help you grow, and it could be a bigger paycheck, and that could help you do things in your life. But holistically, is this really the win for you? And I think a lot of that boils down to, making strategic, conscious decisions as opposed to reacting, right? And self-awareness.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Great points.
Yeah. Chris, there was something there, and maybe it ties into that work-life balance when you were saying that societal expectation that you have the person in the business. And I'm starting to realize that there really is no such thing as work-life balance, which is fine. And I think social media perhaps tries to say there always is a work-life balance. You can have your Ferrari and do this, but in reality, you might be taking that conference call in your Ferrari or on your boat or on your vacation. And I know when you and I have discussed a few things in the business space, we're working after hours, we're connecting outside of the norms. And I'm kind of challenging people now who say, well, you need to have a balance being an entrepreneur. I'm like, it doesn't exist anymore. I think it's healthy if you accept, you want to be successful. You're going to have to put in that hustle. You're going to have to be a part of that grind. and that societal norm of that balance doesn't exist. So be prepared for that you're going to have to do things outside of what people think is normal.
Well, yeah, and there's a very strong theme of attraction and manifestation, and
yes,
and that's a really interesting study, right? In terms of, there's pitfalls in and around that notion that dovetail into the work-life balance and what is realistic. And so, I believe in attraction. I believe in the vibrational frequency, and I believe in those things holistically, like without hesitation. The question and the study and the fascinating part is, in what ways does that operate, and how does that dovetail into grind and grit and resiliency and just hard work and skill sets, and because they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like to your point, we really need to be able to marry these complex, nuanced notions together, and study over time, I think, how those worlds combine, and the recipe that actually works for us, whether it's work-life balance or it's attraction versus hard work, or all these notions that can seem mutually exclusive but really aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. So, Chris, as we come to a close, we obviously would love to have you back again. You're a treasure trove of experience, and I think the first unique guest that we've had in 53, 54, or 55 episodes at this point, where you were in the entrepreneurial space very early on, continued that while also simultaneously working a 9-to-5, relocating to the US, and then still balancing that to come back to the entrepreneurial space. What piece of advice on the mindset side, or something that comes to mind, could you give to that person right now who's trying to break free from the 9-to-5 or struggling as an entrepreneur to keep pushing forward? What is maybe something you can leave us with that could resonate with our listeners and followers?
Well, I think there's some paradoxes in that path, right? So I would recommend planning for it. And again, this is where the paradox comes in. You want to be planning, but you have to dovetail that in with taking action and starting to put things into motion and moving. But there's a pitfall on either side: analysis paralysis, or jumping without even looking and thinking first, right? So I would say, start planning. Start thinking about what that entrepreneurial breaking free looks like. I would say coaching is hugely important there. And as much as anything, and this sounds overused and cliche, but one of the paradoxes that I've found to be very pervasive is, as an entrepreneur, you need to be aggressive and patient at the same time. These things don't happen overnight, and so you need to be aggressively pursuing things. But it's you have to enjoy the journey, because it's not going to be overnight. For 99.9% of people, it isn't overnight. And so while you plan and strategize and take action, you got to find this balance between, I'm going to push hard and I'm going to vibrate at the right frequency, and I'm going to move and get things done. But I'm also got to enjoy that process so I can be patient. And the paradox is, especially in real estate investing, right? Like it's not an overnight thing, but it will happen faster than you think.
That's so. I laugh because the I'm dealing with a patience versus aggressiveness in my own franchise that I'm trying to open here in Toronto, and it's the patience is weighing, because it just agnostic when sometimes you look at the time it takes to do things in business compared to what you think it should take.
Yeah, totally, right. And sometimes those long, slow corners with some patience but pushing can really yield the great results. But it can be tough getting around those corners sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think, Chris, on your next appearance, we got to go over manifesting, visualization, health and wellness too, because you're a treasure trove on that side of the spiritual journey or the paradox. And I think that should be something we should say for the next episode. Chris, where can our listeners connect with you? Maybe you have a website, maybe you got LinkedIn, social medias, or somewhere that you would like our followers and listeners to find you on.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Richard. So the easiest place to start, my name is Shebib.com. That's where my link tree lives, and you can find just about everything related to me there. So that's the single place to navigate to kind of get to social or my real estate site or whichever that might be.
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the Making Waves Mindset Show. Again, if it's your first time listening and you see value, please share the program. This is where we want you to dream bigger, make waves, and take action in life. So, Dave, where can our listeners find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, David A. Moskowitz, and Instagram.
And you can find yours truly on LinkedIn and Instagram at Richard DiBiase. Dave, take it away. Until next time.
Until next time, yes. Until next time, dream bigger, take action, and
make waves. We'll talk to you on our next episode.
Thanks very much, guys.